Hi everyone, this is Evita from HFTP Asia Research Center. Welcome to today's webinar, Artificial Intelligence and Big Data for the Hospitality Industry. Artificial intelligence is the most important general-purpose technology of these years. It has boundless potential across the industry, and we are just beginning to see the possibilities that take the guest experience to a whole new level. Our presenter today is Kanishka Agiwal. He is the head of IBM's travel and transportation industry for South Asia, and also a member of IBM Industry Academy. He has a master's degree in business administration and a bachelor's in the engineering computer science. He is also a regular speaker at industry conferences, focusing on the personalization, deep cognitive behavior, next-generation analytical capabilities, new revenue generation, mobility, loyalty solutions to create differentiation experience for both clients and their customers. Now, please help me welcome your presenter, Kanishka. Thanks, and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Evita. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in which part of the world. My name is Kanishka, as Evita just mentioned, and for the next 45 minutes or so, we will go through what is really artificial intelligence about, especially in the hospitality industry, give you a flavor of what are we doing in terms of AI today in the 21st century, how it has evolved, what are use cases and technologies that organizations as well as specific groups are developing using AI. So with that, let me just kickstart this, and I wanted to give you a first sense of what really the word AI and cognitive and everything else that you learn about deep learning, machine learning comes around with. If you go back probably in the 1960s, 70s, and we'll go through some of that history. But when you went back to the 60s and the 70s, when there was still the computers were in their nascent form, there were the tabulating machines, there were punch cards that were being used. There were a group of people, and this was way back in 1966 when a gentleman called John McCarthy actually developed the first program to have chess being played by a computer and had it played by Soviet counterparts. So it's his students and the Soviet students who went ahead and gone and put out what we call as the first chess program, and eventually it ended up in a draw. That we thought was the very first instance of AI being used. Sure, we had the Turing machines, but they were more of a computing machine than an AI machine. And really what AI was, that it was the ability for that machine to go ahead and predict what would be the next move. It wasn't put out in a code. It wasn't an if this, then do this. It wasn't that, but it was something that if you moved your pawn by a particular square, then what would be another person's response to that? Go on to the 80s and then into the 90s, there were multiple set of AI experiments that came out. One of the most famous commercial ones, and if some of you were old enough, you would recall, there was a Japanese toy called the Tamagotchi, and Tamagotchi was really the first AI commercial toy. It was really the shape of a small egg with an LCD screen and 3 buttons on it, which let you, the toy was really an egg. And when you purchased it, the egg would come alive. There would be an animal that would come off it. You would see it on this screen. Now, you had to take care of the pet, as they called it, or the Tamagotchi, just like you would take care of an animal or a pet or your baby. You had to feed it, you had to play with it, you had to put it to sleep. If you fed it too much, then it would bloat up and die faster because of obesity. If you didn't feed it, then it would die of malnutrition or starvation. If you didn't let it sleep, then it would be really cranky the next day and wouldn't play with you or wouldn't interact with you enough. And that's, again, a very, very strong example of how AI came out as a commercial venture. We are today now looking at AI being pushed out in chatbots. We're looking at it being pushed out in terms of emails, in terms of augmented reality for you to look at check-in process, new revenues that you would come at the hospitality industry. So if you go, look at what we are primarily focusing on, and if you look at the overall data that's coming in, and you'll see those 4 boxes there. The pattern here is that this data is not in the form that you would like to have data generally put in. It's not in a regular columns and rows as you see in an Excel spreadsheet. You have today IoT sensors installed everywhere. It's there in a dustbin going all the way to a container cargo ship, to a IoTized building that has multiple IoT sensors of where an air conditioner should be moving in or should be switched on or switched off. And all of this data is coming in, being fed in. What do you make sense of that data? The same thing goes for, say, Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. You have a ton of that rich video, audio data that's coming in. You have TripAdvisor. If somebody could actually just mine the natural language, unstructured data that today exists in TripAdvisor, they could make a lot of difference, as opposed to just saying, hey, I received great service at this particular hotel. Thank you, and please appreciate that. And more often than not, it's the general manager of the hotel just pasting in a standard response, or even to a rant which said, look, my laundry was not done well, I ended up with a burnt scarf, then what should I be doing? Is essentially reaching out to the customer, making sure that this customer is taken care of, and making sure it does not repeat again. How do you catch those if you aren't monitoring it real time? Health monitors. There is a particular airline in the world that loses about $400 million each year because of flights being rerouted or being called back because of a sick passenger that's on board. Now, if they had access to data, and I know we're getting into gray areas of privacy, but if you had access to that data, which a lot of people have on their Fitbit monitors today or their Apple watches, then you could know if that particular person is going to be sick before he's on board. So, well, you will not shave off the entire $400 million, but you could save off a significant chunk of that. I mean, even if you shave off half of that, you would have recovered your cost of investment. So, all of this data, as we look at it, is essentially what was called as big data a few years ago. But today, that big data is incorrect. And an example for big data is really if you have interacted with a 2-year-old, or if you have a child of your own and child has gone through the second or the third year. And when they start learning to count, for them, big data is the number 10. And that's only because they have 10 digits on their hands, 10 fingers. The number 11 actually exists in what they call as their multiverse, but does not exist in their universe. They don't know where they can put the number 11 on. Till you tell them, hey, you could use the toes on your feet to count the next set of numbers, and they say, oh, well, we can go up to 20. And at some point in time, their cognitive capabilities improve, and they're able to go beyond the 20, 21s, because now they're able to place those numbers in their what they call as universe. And so the multiverse that they were in earlier is now becoming their universe, and so they start comprehending. And that's how organizations behave as well. You have a ton of data that exists with you today, but you don't know what to do with it. Till somebody gives you a tool that says, hey, here's how I can make sense of that data, and you say, now it makes sense, so let me go ahead and bring this data in for insights for myself. Some years back, unstructured data like video, like text that's written in free flow format, audio, were unstructured data that people didn't know what to make sense of it. So it just resided on those terabytes of hard disk, but essentially were wiped out after some point in time. Today there are governments, organizations, a whole set of ecosystem that is making sense of this and deriving insights out of it. Facial recognition, for example, I'm based out of India, and facial recognition, iris scans, fingerprints, biometrics are becoming hot in terms of citizen identification here. So that's a way of an unstructured data being used now in a structured format to use cases. Most of this data, again, is understood by traditional computer systems only in a certain fraction of it. So you need to rethink the way that this data has to be thought about. And think of weather data that's coming in. Weather data can be in n number of parameters: the wind factor, the precipitation, the time of the day, the planetary positions, the cloud movement. So all of this, when you start putting in a standard traditional database, and if you understand how these typically work, is you generally have rows and columns for a database. Think of it like an Excel sheet, but then you also have what we call as a primary key and a secondary key. Now, where does the primary key and secondary key stop for weather data that is contiguous? And weather data is not discrete, so I can't pinpoint that at 8:12 a.m. weather would be like this and at 8:13 a.m. weather would be something different. Because it's transient, it goes across those seconds and it's going to be a linear shift across to that 8:13 data point. And therefore, I can't have it in different rows and columns, or at least envision that data in that format. Take another example, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. You could be, say, John Hopkins on LinkedIn. You could be at Rolling Stones 123 on Twitter. And on Facebook, you could be just John H. Now, if you've spoken to me as an organization, if you've spoken to me through one of these channels and ranted on another, how do I connect those dots with you? How do I know what is your primary key? Are you known as John Hopkins? Are you John R. Hopkins? Are you John H? Or are you Rolling Stones 123? Which one of these becomes your defining singular key under which I could place your multiple set of other keys or other identities across the spectrum? So it definitely requires us to look at it differently and correlate it much more differently. Now, when you go and look at the overall evolution that's happened, right? So I spoke to you about what happened in the 1960s, how machine learning has evolved. And essentially, we have artificial intelligence as the mother's science or the mother's set of all of these. Deep learning, as we look at it today, is something that is what is true AI in regular parlance. And there's a reason why we put that cat out there. Finding out cats and dogs are particularly difficult. They're not the easiest recognizable animals for a very different reason. A cat has its eyes focusing forward, whereas a dog has its eyes focusing on the sides. Most animals of the feline family have typically eyes facing forward, but most other animals have their eyes facing on the sides. Now, there is a slight difference. Take a pug, for example, and a pug is that little cute dog that you typically see in a lot of ads and a lot of movies. A pug has its eyes facing forward. It has similar characteristics like a cat. It has a pudgy nose. It has small floppy ears. The tail, well, if you see it, then you would definitely know because it's got a short tail as opposed to a cat that's got a longer tail. But otherwise, most characteristics look like that. It just looks like a bigger cat. How do I know when an image recognition program runs through it that this is a cat and this is a pug? Therefore, there are two different families or two different species. One is a dog, one is a cat, and so on and so forth classification. That is what is called a deep learning. And deep learning does not happen just by itself, or you teach it once and it learns. It's an evolutionary behavior, which takes us to the next slide. You would want systems to first understand the data set that you're throwing at it. So I wanted to first understand that, look, here is a cat or a dog, but then I want the system to reason with me. Why is this a cat or why is this a dog? What are the characteristics that classified this as a dog or a cat? Based on that, I throw in multiple data sets at it. And at some point in time, it starts learning and saying, okay, I understand now why this was called a pug and not a cat. It's because its nose or the characteristics of the nose are much larger than what a cat has. Also, I continuously find its mouth open or the tongue to be a little more floppier than what it is for a cat. So it starts learning that, and it interacts with you at each point in time to learn that. It's just like a child. When a child starts learning, it does not know the alphabets or the letters on day one. But as it interacts with you, as you correct it, as it starts learning and reasoning with you, it knows that the number 2 comes after the number 1 and the number 3 comes after 2. And there is a reason why it is, till we teach it arithmetic and it says 1 plus 2 leads to 3, and therefore 3 comes after 2, and so on and so forth. So it starts learning the reasoning around it. It starts bringing all of this together in terms of complex, say, arithmetic, and pushing out more complex data sets or insights for you to build on. There are a couple of classes, definitely, of AI. You could have unsupervised learning and you could have supervised learning. Unsupervised learning is where I have absolutely no control of what the system wants to do. So this is in other words, the next Skynet. But most organizations and most groups have gone away from unsupervised learning. It's still a realm of academic interest, but for commercial purposes, most organizations want supervised learning. Nobody wants a fiasco where a bot or a response goes out that is completely against what the company policy is or what is general acceptable societal norms. So you would bring in that supervision around it. That's where the learning comes plays a part around it. Now there is a question of, does this go ahead and replace human beings? And we say no, it does not, because there is a reason why these systems are good at certain things but not good at certain things. So for example, moral decisions or just general common sense. A human would be far better placed at this. Think of a call center where a call comes in for a credit card fee waiver, and most credit card companies generally have a spike in their call volumes around the November-December timeframe, because that's when most of the fees or the annual fees are raised up for the credit card. So generally customers call in, ask them that, well, we would like our fees to be waived off, else we are going to discontinue using this card, or we would like you to cancel this. It's a set algorithm. The agent over there is empowered to make that decision, especially if your credit history has been good or you've been using a number of transactions or set a particular limit of transactions over the year. So he's authorized to make that waiver off. He just obviously goes through the regular, what they call is the show of making it sound like, oh, we are doing a big favor to you, but you could get away with it next year as well. And that's a bit of common sense that the humans use, but it's an automated process still. So can I not push that out to a cognitive system where I know, based on this mathematics or the arithmetic of knowing what his score was, what is transaction limits, how has he used his credit card over the year, waive off his fees, that's a mechanical process, versus push out a call which actually has a bit of a dilemma where I know this particular person has not used his card for the last 2 years, but that's because he was not in the country or he was posted abroad. He's come back, now wants to reuse the card. Do I still use the same algorithm that the agent or the cognitive system used, or do I bring in a human decision-making process there? Moral dilemmas, a sweet female voice on the other end trying to get a discount out could actually be a moral dilemma for a human being, but could easily be a bias or a cognitive bias, as we call it, for a cognitive system. So the cognitive system could eliminate that bias and still look at it very, very objectively and keep the discussion consistent, as opposed to a moral bias that may exist on a human side. So you would balance out some of this. The abstract, the imagination, all of that cannot still be done by the machines. But the machines are really good at the mundane work, the automated tasks, the tasks that require a deep delving down data and coming out with insights around it. The essence is that it is still being data driven. It's just that the data is now in a form, like I said, unstructured, that you do not have traditional machines using it. But there is nothing that a cognitive system does which is non-data driven at this moment. So with that, I want to throw out a quick poll question. Billy, do you want to take that forward?
Yeah.
We'll give you.
Everyone should see polling question number 1 on their screen at this time. It reads, which man is credited with coining the term artificial intelligence in 1955 and is considered one of the early pioneers in the field? Again, the question is, which man credited with coining the term artificial intelligence? Just a few more seconds to answer here. And Kanishka, it looks like we have 1 vote for every single answer here. Oh, 2 for John McCarthy. Back to you.
All right. Thanks, Billy. So I'm going to go ahead and publish this right now. Okay, looks like there's 1 or 2 more coming in. Just going to count 1, 2, 3, and publish. Okay, looks like we've got a bit of a tie between Isaac Asimov and John McCarthy, but actually the answer is John McCarthy, and I actually gave it away in the introduction. So it was him who coined it because the way he looked at machines, and this is way past the Turing machine. So the Turing machine was a computational machine, but John McCarthy actually saw the first potential in using something like this and building out systems that could act on their own. In fact, he's been one of the very early pioneers in a lot of AI technology. He was well regarded in MIT. He was then a professor emeritus in Stanford. You should go Google him up and read more about him if you're interested in this field. Okay, so with that, moving on, we did want to now deep dive into what is the industry doing around it, and I think the primary questions that most C-suite is asking is, look, how can I make my search much easier? And to get onto a website, the ability to search is the number one task that's performed on a website. But I want you to search exactly what I'm thinking about. How do I make it deeply personalized? I don't want it to be macro personalized. When I say macro personalized, all 25, 31 Caucasian males, this is how they behave on a Monday morning traveling from, say, Bangalore to Hong Kong. Now that's macro segmentation, and it's no good because that's not how everybody behaves really. And also that's not how those would behave on different points in time. So for example, I behave very differently on a Monday morning versus on a Saturday morning, because on a Monday morning I'm rushing to my next meeting or to the next place of work. But on a Saturday morning, I'm much more in a leisurely fashion. I'm okay to take a later flight. I'm okay to slightly indulge in the lounge or use a particular upgrade in an aircraft. I want to look at how do you manage disruption. You could have a disruption that occurs because of a weather condition at an airport, which causes a delay in a flight, which causes passengers to lose out their first night at a particular hotel. But then how does the hotel know that these people were actually supposed to check in and were delayed because of a flight, and therefore proactively manage that? Now, today these two databases are two different databases. The way you would, and that's why most hospitality industries typically ask you, can you please tell us which flight are you arriving from? That is generally not monitored real time. It's only monitored once your time to check in has elapsed. So it's maybe 12 midnight, and then somebody looks into the file and sees, okay, this person was supposed to arrive by LH 7:50. I now track LH 7:50 and I see it's delayed, and therefore I make a note. But more often than not, many hospitality firms don't even make a note, or the check-in agents don't have access to that data. So, again, how do you manage that disruption? Both in terms of data that you don't have, as well as data that exists in your organization itself. Somebody had a particular incident at a hotel. How do you start handling that better? Which takes us to the point of customer intimacy. Do you know your customer well enough that you can handle both the disruptions as well as personalize their experience for them, which results in much more intelligent operations? For me to know which bin needs to be cleared right now because it's overflowing, which air conditioner is extremely cold because the customer has been using multiple layers of blankets because he can't turn down the AC, or the water is too hot and therefore he's letting it flow for a significant amount of time before he starts using or drinking it. Then that's some of the things that you would like to bring in with these IoT sensors, and that will essentially yield to higher revenue per traveler because you're giving a better experience. Your operations are far more intelligent. You're able to manage the disruptions. So net result is your both bottom and your top line looking much more healthier. If you've transited or used JetBlue of late, a couple of their airports now have what they call as a bot, and essentially it's a crew bot. You don't have crew standing there, so the crew is possibly sitting in a room, but these bots are moving around, and you can stand in front of the bot asking it, hey, I need to get to this particular gate, or this is where I need to change my flight, my ticket, I need an upgrade, what can I do? And this agent then helps you with that, or the bot with that camera on top starts helping you with that. What this does is it frees up the agents to off the stress of handling so many customers. Also, the customers are a lot more patient with a bot as they would with an agent. So the customer experience is far better, and these bots are fatigue free, so they can essentially be there 24/7 in the terminal, and you could have agents change in the background, which is in the room or the control center that they are at. If you've gone to one of the Washington Hilton properties, you could find what they call as Connie. Connie is powered by Watson and Wayblazers. It goes ahead and can tell you everything about the hotel. So you could ask Connie, what can I do at the hotel, and it tell you all kinds of things that you want to do. You could say, Connie, I've come here for a vacation with my kids. What do you recommend that I should be looking at around the hotel? You could also ask Connie, what are nearby good places for, say, sushi? So it could tell you within the vicinity of the neighborhood. Kayak is actually putting out a Slack bot for bookings, and that you could use because a lot of millennials nowadays use Slack. And what more interesting is, this little bot out here. It looks like a bot, and that's where it comes to another interesting question around form factor. What this is essentially called, this thing is called Relay, but it's essentially a device in which you could put in something, close it, and send it, and it would go to a room. You could put in, say, in-room dining. So you could put in a plate of spaghetti on it, close it, punch in the room number, it would go in. Only that room could open it with their key or a secure pin, open it, take it out, and it would go back. You could also bring in laundry, and it's useful for multiple set of reasons. One is the whole privacy issue here. And when I say privacy, it's actually physical privacy. How many times have you had some, a hospitality agent come in to your room where you are not in a position right now to open the room door? So you say, okay, well, I'm coming in, you start getting dressed or wear something more appropriate, you step out, take the particular parcel and go back in. And that's slightly taken out here. The second is this could wait for some time and you still are okay. So it would wait for about 2 or 3 minutes before it says, okay, I don't find anybody inside, therefore I'm going back. And you don't have the guilt of saying, well, I called in somebody and I have to send it back. You don't have to tip it. That's an important factor as well. And then finally, it's a secure parcel that goes from point A to point B, especially in large hotels. It is a very, very important, area of security because you do not know if there's any pilferage that happens from point A to point B. On the next pieces, and this is, sorry if it's taking time. Yep. So you have today a number of voice-activated devices. So you have Alexa, you have Siri, you have Google, and a couple of other smaller firms that are making a foray in voice-activated searches, voice-activated commands, IoTized rooms. People are starting to make sense of how they can use this, and we look at a couple of more examples of what hospitality firms are doing around this. But this is now becoming a lot more important in terms of knowing how your customers are behaving. So people are able to mine this data, of course, in an anonymized fashion, but know what people are searching for. What are they using this primarily? Are they using to switch off lights? Are they using for room service? Are they using this to switch on their TVs and find out the best show or the best Netflix program that is out there? It is revolutionizing the industry. You would want your agents, both in terms of call center as well as at the property, to know how can I use a voice-activated assistance service. There's a recent survey that was carried out in the Americas and said about 64% actually prefer a chatbot or a voice-activated service because it's instantaneous, it gives them answers that they look for. It's only for those deep, complicated ones that they prefer going back to an agent, but the regular ones where I just need to know, hey, what time does breakfast open and close, or switch on the TV or set the temperature to 24 degrees centigrade is what they would want just through a voice-activated device. You have a ton of chatbots today running in. You could have basic chatbots which essentially says, can you make a booking for a particular table, and it says how many, you say 8, you choose a time, and then it makes a booking at that particular place. To more complex ones that we're pushing with airlines and travel industry, where it says, look, I want to go for a vacation in the month of April, we're looking for someplace warm. Now, what is warm to you may be very different from what is warm to me. I mean, if you're from the Nordics, warm is essentially 25 degrees centigrade, or maybe that's hot. But if you're from the tropics like India or Singapore or Hong Kong, warm could be anything like 35 degrees or 40 degrees. So for me to know who is this person who's asking this question, and therefore what kind of place should I be pushing out, it's going to be a very, very open-ended question. So the answer is also equally going to be, if not open-ended, slightly more receptive to change. So it would say, okay, would you like to go to Hawaii? But then I also need to know your budget. Are you a $500 guy or are you a $2,000 guy? Because if you're a $500 guy, then you probably are best off at Jersey Beach. But if you're a $2,000 guy, then I would take you to Hawaii. I want to know, what are you doing as far as your itinerary is concerned. So I would ask you leading questions, or the chatbot would ask you leading questions. I'm saying, are you traveling with kids or are you just traveling with your wife? Is this going to be a romantic getaway? Is it going to be a family vacation? What do they enjoy doing? And then build out your itinerary. So you could have chatbots that are leading and talking to you just like a human does, and you could have others that will be very transactional that you see on that chart there. Very interestingly, in fact, there was a good experiment that was carried out at one of the universities in the U.S. where you have teaching assistants, and teaching assistants are typically those that answer questions on what is my course, what is reading material, when is my next test due. So the mundane questions that professors get, but these teaching assistants instead respond to that. This particular university actually put out a chatbot to answer these questions without telling the students that they were interacting with a chatbot. So there were about 5 teaching assistants. One of them was a chatbot. At the end of the course, they were asked to rate, and actually the chatbot came up as the #1 teaching assistant. It's only then they were told that, look, you were actually interacting with a chatbot. And very fittingly, it was actually an AI class. So they are getting there where it's becoming very difficult to know what is, which one of that is human and which one of them is not. So with that, we'll move on to the next polling question. Billy, do you want to go ahead and publish that? Yep, okay.
The next polling question should be live on your screen, and it reads, how are artificial intelligence systems different from traditional systems? And your choices are: AI systems understand, they reason, they learn, they interact, or all of the above. Again, how are they different from traditional systems? Just a couple more seconds to answer here. It looks like 100% of our audience said the answer is all of the above.
All right, that is, you should probably, 6, and we should go ahead and publish that. Perfect. I think that's pretty much self-evident. We are not going to debate too much on that. Yes, they understand, they reason, they learn, and finally they interact with you. And that's what makes it an AI system. Moving on, some of the industry examples and closer home of what you are doing or you're seeing. We have today Harman actually pushing out a number of devices, especially in the audio space, that can listen, that can, so you could have these clocks or these speakers that can listen to you and push out any kind of instruction that you put out for that room. So switch on a TV, switch off the lights, turn on the music. Can you set the water temperature at so and so? So that is already there, and you probably have already experienced these devices. And of course, they're not the only ones. There are a couple of others that have come out in the market, but clearly they were the leaders in pushing something like this out. There's something very interesting that's also happening in the food ordering and the restaurant space. Weather is playing a big role in deciding what you should be offering your customers. Take Starbucks for that matter. Whether I should be doing a cold brew right now or is it a hot brew? And that all depends on the weather. If the weather in New York is going to change from, say, 80 degree Fahrenheit to sudden drop of 60 degree Fahrenheit in the evening, then I may want to change my menu accordingly and stock up appropriately. Again, beer, for example, and there's a reason why we put out beer there. The sales of lager versus wheat versus stout differ between different both weather times as well as time of the day. A wheat beer is more of a summer afternoon drink, whereas a lager is more of a night, colder weather drink. If I knew all of those details, then I could appropriately order or back order these quantities. If I was a microbrewery, I shouldn't be tapping a stout beer if I knew the next 10 days is going to be hot as hell weather, because that beer is just going to go waste. There will not be any takers for it. So you would bring that bit of customization both in terms of offering as well as your basket of suggestions that go out to customers. So if you were in the business of allowing customers to choose their menu or food or give them recommendations of where they can eat, then if you knew what the weather was for the day, you could appropriately change and tweak it better for better uptake. Then that takes us, if because of weather, more importantly, you could know or reduce food wastage. And food wastage is not just a function of weather. Obviously, food wastage is a function of weather. It's a function of how people consume a particular dish, also the quality of the dish, and so on and so forth, and portions of the dish. And what we have done is used augmented reality or video to take a picture or know how spoilage or food wastage typically happens. So if I knew a particular plate had more of fish being wasted or more of French fries being wasted, then I would actually go back to look what are the root causes of something like this being wasted. Was it because the French fries had too much of oil, or was it not paired up well with this particular dish? And it could help you understand or maybe reduce portions or take remedial actions, whatever they may be, to make this a lot better. And think of what it can do, especially with the amount of food that is wasted in the industry today, both in the airline industry as well as the hospitality industry. This could be a significant game changer in terms of the overall bottom line impact. We spoke about Harman. There's another organization called Panasonic, which you're all well aware of. And Panasonic is today pushing out what they call as digital mirrors. These mirrors, as you see on that screen, can actually push out a ton of information to you, which can be customized as per your personal preference. Today, this information is typically pushed out on a television, but the television is not so personalized. It needs to be on. Most often than not, business travelers, for example, hardly switch on a television because they're just working, but everybody uses a mirror. So there's a reason why they put this out, and that's why that form factor of it does not have to be a robot, it does not have to be a chatbot, it does not have to be in a certain way or fashion we see AI systems to be. It can be across multiple devices. So you could have something like that pushed out. So, for example, if this person could sync up his Apple iPhone or his Google Pixel to it, then that could actually pull out those relevant feeds from there and show it to him on the screen. Maybe you could read your email on this, for all you might know. You have, hospitality firms like the Dorchester chain of hotels that is today using what is called the Metis AI platform, and this was my earlier point that I spoke to you about of how do you know what are people speaking about you on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and correlate that to put out a better experience for your customers. Today, the only way to do it is take those guest feedback forms, the traditional ways of capturing feedback, and then tweaking what worked and what didn't work. But do realize that very little feedback actually comes through traditional channels in today's world. Most of this feedback is in those channels that you don't own. So this platform is today actually mining all of that data across, bringing that together and helping shape the brand much better, or helping shape that into a lot more actionable format. And you could bring in augmented reality. So we spoke about video very early on in terms of knowing what it could do for, say, maintenance, for the food wastage area. But you could also bring this into a sensory experience for your customers. So if you go to the Atlantis in Dubai, you could have an augmented reality headset actually strapped on you, and you could explore the entire hotel just sitting in your room. You could make you could experience the hotel at the time of booking. So if you actually went to a particular center that did these bookings, put on this headset, it would give you a 360-degree view of the hotel, and that could make your decision making for booking that property much faster. Again, it is a way, a marketing tool definitely, but can also be a great experience tool. I mean, if you were at the Atlantis and you wanted to see the dolphin show, but somehow were invalid to go for the dolphin show, maybe you were 80, you couldn't walk up till there. Could you sit in your room and still experience something like this? You could today do check-in using facial recognition. I spoke to you about what India is doing with biometrics. There are airports in India that are rolling out biometric check-in. So I could actually stand at the airport door. It could scan my iris or take my fingerprint, know exactly the flight I'm traveling with, print out a boarding pass, and off I am. So, no more of getting to a check-in counter, validating myself, and moving forward. And this is what hotels are doing. There are a ton of hotels that are today doing something like this. And finally, I think the bigger piece that comes in, and this is where most organizations are also interested in, because this directly results in cost savings, is around the entire IoT space. The energy consumption for a hotel is obviously the biggest chunk after manpower, and that everybody wants to keep in check. So if I knew people aren't in a room, if I knew why do I crank up the AC so much that it makes people very cold or very hot, can I actually start using smarter IoTized sensors that will make it automated way of moving the temperatures up and down? Dustbins, for example, you could know when dustbins are actually full or need cleaning, as opposed to a person going in every now and then and checking with them. You could know when a bed needs to be done instead of going and checking. The same goes for bathrooms and so on and so forth. So bring that piece in, and you would be able to bring out a ton of savings or shave off cost from your existing property itself. Billy, do you want to go ahead and publish the final polling question?
Thanks so much. The next question reads, Deep Blue was the first computer to beat a reigning world chess champion. Which Russian did Deep Blue beat in May of 1997? Just a couple more seconds while people throw in their answers here. Kanishka, it looks like 100% of our audience are going with Garry Kasparov. Back to you.
That's pretty smart audience as I look at it. Garry Kasparov is actually the right answer. This was in 97. IBM built the Deep Blue, which was one of the very first demonstrations of what AI can do in terms of working with a human being. And they went ahead, had Garry Kasparov work with it. In fact, some trivia there. Garry Kasparov actually stopped one of the games because he thought that the computer could not be so good, and felt that there was a human being at the back end who was actually monitoring the moves and punching them in. He asked for a view of who is actually controlling it. There was a pause that was taken in. Once he was satisfied that it was the machine itself playing it and nobody else, is when he again resumed the game. He eventually lost that game as well. And I think that was one of the biggest defeats Garry Kasparov had, but obviously in good spirit since it was against a machine. So with that, I'm going to close the session, at least in terms of the slides, and just open it up for questions to just check, what would you think AI could help in terms of your organization, or where you see your organization gravitating towards AI, or any other specific questions that you may have around AI. I'm happy to take them now.
Thank you so much. We are going to open the floor to questions here. If you do have a question for Kanishka, go ahead and make sure you're using that Q&A tab on your interface. And let's start with the first question here. that came in. The first question asks, what are some of the current challenges your company is facing in the space of data?
Yeah, so I think in terms of, like I mentioned, right, the data that we today have comes in a lot of structured format. It is in a way that probably, well, actually unstructured format, but some of it is structured. It is in a way that some of these systems can understand, but a lot of it just goes as junk. So, I mean, take for example a typical A350 aircraft. If you've ever flown that, it's the latest aircraft coming off the Airbus family. That particular aircraft generates about 10 terabytes of data in about its 5 or 6 hour of flying time that it would do between the east and the west coast of US. Now, what do you do with that 10 terabyte of data which is coming through sensors, the wind shear, the fuel consumption, the flex of the wings, the stress that comes on the fuselage? You have no idea what to do with that data, so you tend to discard it. But if I knew what it was, what it meant, then could I actually load up the aircraft lighter or heavier? Could I actually, push up the fuel on the aircraft versus have it refueled in Vegas because that's a more cheaper area to fuel than the New York. Can I actually load it up with lesser food because I know there's spoilage of food that happens on the aircraft? So there are multiple things that you could do, but that is a challenge for an aircraft or an airline company because they don't know how can I start using this data better. If they could, and at least invest to monetize that data or to take out cost using that data, it could make a significant impact both in terms of their operational capability as well as their customer satisfaction. So I think that that is primarily what companies are facing as far as how do I leverage my data better.
Great answer. The next question asks, currently, what kind of systems does your company employ to store, sort, analyze, and interpret data?
Actually, that's a pretty useful question because it comes straight with what we call as legacy traditional systems to new age systems. I think there will still continue to be a marriage between these two systems. So if you think your traditional databases are going away, not so soon because they need to process still that legacy formats of data, the code that is put out. So you could have your regular RDBMS systems, which is your relational database management systems, the regular bus and enterprise architectures that you generally have. But at the same time, you will start now bringing, and when I say all of this, it is in your overall framework of enterprise data warehouse, as they call it, right? So you would cleanse that data, you massage the data, you would bring it into, so that's the data warehouse, and then bring it into systems that will understand it, analyze it, and push out through a reporting dashboard. So that's your analytics platform. But you would increasingly have systems that no longer require a database because, as I told you, that an AI system does not look at a database the way we look at it. You will have systems that don't need that analytical capability because they are self-learning, and therefore once you've set in a piece of code, you now actually have an interface where you have a supervised learning human being actually monitoring the system or knowing what kind of chats are coming in, how is the system responding to it, are there any flags on the chat, which is any incorrect words that have come out, and therefore correct the system on it. So the way these systems will work will need a bit of human coaching and a human eye on them, but the capacity of data that they can handle will be far greater than what traditional systems do. For traditional systems, you don't need human monitoring, but that's because they always perform a single repetitive automated task. So you will have a balance of these two systems always existing. Don't see in near future both of them going away.
Great answer. The next question asks, what does AI mean to your company?
Okay. I mean, the answer to that, or I'll spin it in a different way. Depends on what the maturity of your organization is. I mean, if you're an organization that's just taking up a digital route, AI could be very fundamental to just having my emails or my invoices coming from vendors being categorized into the right bucket for a human to answer. That's all AI could be. But if I'm on a very advanced stage or a high degree of maturity, AI could be what we looked at, that virtual reality piece, where I can actually look at it, I can point on it, I can go to a particular restaurant through my VR glasses, make a reservation or order food from there because I've looked the way they've made that food. I could be looking at a chatbot that can do a dynamic itinerary for me. So that is how I would classify AI as. I mean, if you really ask me, the very first example, while it's AI, it's still a piece of automation. It's not true AI because it's not learning really. But in the next few cases, it has started to learn and get better. But hey, who are we to debate on what works for one organization and what doesn't? Because each one may have different use cases or different needs in the way they employ AI. I mean, I'll give you a great example. We have a particular company that's pushing out what they call as these apps to order food in a mass to IT park. Earlier, when people would go down, they would go to the counter and say, I wanted a cup of noodles, I wanted maybe some curry with that, and the person would just make that up and give it to them. Now these guys can order it online, and by the time they go down, it's ready for them, especially in that big IT park. It works brilliant in that IT park. It's able to recommend and give out that today, you should be ordering this, or this is cheaper, and so on and so forth. It does not work in a single company, because in a single company at any point in time, there are no more than 10 or 12 people standing in line asking for something. I can easily do that transaction over the counter. So there I would not bring in something like this, because it's just an overkill for that particular situation. So you also need to balance out between what is optimal versus what is overkill.
Great answer. We do have time for one more question here. This question that came in has many parts, so let's choose a couple of them.
Yeah.
The question asks, in which stages of travel would it be? Inspiration, planning, booking, scheduling, traveling, experiencing, sharing, dreaming.
Yep.
Which stage would be the most affected, and which stage would be most informative to do data mining? And last but not least, which companies are focusing on developments specifically in hospitality and tourism industry?
Okay, so I'll take the first part, which is in which stage would it be most affected. I think we all know that at the point of inspiration and planning is when you have actually won most of your customers. So I think that is where a lot of this will come in play. Go back 20 years when you went into a travel agent and when you didn't have any of these tools, you didn't have the kayaks and the Travelocities of the world, you could go in and that travel agent knew your budget. He exactly suggested what would work for you, and you were hooked and you purchased that ticket or that itinerary. It's only because he could inspire and plan it much better than anybody else, which then took care of everything else after that. I mean, obviously, the booking after that became incidental. The scheduling was incidental. Obviously, you traveled, you experienced, shared, and dreamt about it. So the first part is the most impacted part, and that's where most are focusing using AI. During the booking, the scheduling, traveling, those three are what I call as the operational parts of travel. There are tons of tools that are doing that better or taking the friction out of travel. The last part is where you're experiencing, sharing, and dreaming, is where both organizations are doing it well, but more importantly, this is being done by a social media company. So Facebook is doing that well. I mean, the whole business model of Facebook, Instagram is really, please share your travel, please share your your pictures that you have so that I get more likes. There's more content, rich content flowing in the platform. So that's where the entire model. I mean, Instagram is all about food pictures. People want to post things that they eat at the restaurant. So they're doing that, but you would need a hospitality firm to make sure that they're mining that data and bringing it back for feedback, and then go back and do that loop of inspiration planning again. The stages that would be so I think the last two stages would be the most informative in terms of data mining, for you to know what are they sharing, what are they dreaming all about. Once they've experienced it, they've put it on TripAdvisor, so can I actually go ahead and mine that piece around? Now, in terms of what companies are focusing on developments, there are a ton of them that are today doing it. So there's niche startups that are focusing on something like this, but as well as larger corporations. I mean, a caveat, I work for IBM, but IBM is doing a ton of work in this space around the hospitality industry. There are smaller startup ecosystems that are working on it. I think of Zomato. Zomato is obviously in Asia, but think of what is also happening in the U.S. Wayblazer, for example, is a great example in terms of the travel and tourism industry. Larger corporations are bringing or raising up specific divisions around this. Specifically, the whole digital ecosystem or the digital teams that are today working on it have morphed into just from mobile app and great websites to now start looking at how can I bring AI into my overall experience.
Thank you so much. That is all the time that we do have for today. So on behalf of HFTP, thank you all for attending today's event and for your participation. Also, a big thank you to Kanishka for sharing his expertise with us today. This does conclude our presentation, and you may now disconnect.